We're going to go into a topic this morning, and the topic will be flourishing. And it's a relatively new teaching or a new word on the scene of secular Buddhism. And it seems like this comes around every once in a while. Something kind of starts to, I'll use the word blossom or mushroom or bloom, and it becomes a part of the daily dialogue about Buddhist teachings. And it's almost like an add-on, like it adds another flavor to the teachings, to the Dharma.
And Linda, as you say that, I think about when we were working with Whitten Higgins around editing. He was our editor for our book. And we sort of did get into a small debate about even the fact that we weren't using a word of this nature in the book.
Right, right. And it was more solidly developed in the secular Buddhist tradition. And we were just kind of learning or engaging with it and had some skepticism around it. And I think that's also a part of our practice is to explore something new on the scene and kind of
Mhm.
see where it fits and see how we want to use it within the teachings.
And another thing that we do is we look in the dictionary for definitions and riff off of those. That's something, I don't know, that's just something we've gotten into that we found useful. We're not saying that's part of secular Buddhism, but a
Right.
useful process for us.
Right, right. And in the sense, the word flourishing, we're going to bring in two definitions and talk about it today, but it it is in a way a correction or an adaptation of what could be an erroneous view of or understanding of dukkha, and that view of that life is all about suffering that Buddhism often gets pegged into. It's like a hole, that we can't get out of, or a ditch we can't get out of.
Yeah, and then of course that's very depressing, and I don't want to be involved in something that's that depressing. That all of life is suffering. Well, that is depressing, and it's actually not, as you said, it's an erroneous view. That actually is not our lived, hopefully, not our lived experience of life. Or I would even take it a step further. If it was our lived experience of life, we might get a diagnosis of depression.
Hmm. 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 I mean, because in that, let's say, erroneous view, there's really not that much room for light. And in depression, there's not that much lightness or a capacity to touch that or be close to it. And we are looking at this word flourishing as leaning into light a little bit more, leaning into during difficult times, where are the places that we find hope, joy, flourishing, thriving, etc.
And of course, we are living in a difficult time in terms of world politics, national politics, climate emergency, et cetera, et cetera. Pandemics. My article I read in the New York Times this morning is they keep writing about how prepared are we for the next pandemic. So it's like that's now part of our life.
Yeah, yeah. Definition of flourishing, huh? First one.
Yes.
Okay, this one is just from the internet dictionary. Um, Grow or develop in a healthy or vigorous way, especially as the result of particularly favorable environment.
And I think that some of what we're doing in meditation and in our sanghas and in our inner worlds, we are cultivating particularly, hopefully, cultivating particularly favorable environments, whether they be internally. Um, and I think that that's a lot of what changes for people in reflective meditation, and probably in meditation, hopefully, in general, which is our inner world becomes more of a favorable environment.
Right, right. And even in that direction, we know we can't change everything, or even there's things beyond our control, but it does seem that access opens to change, that something changes. And there's even a mark of existence that things are impermanent. They will change. And there's I'd say the positive direction of that teaching is that we can see some development of flourishing, things that flourish alongside of dukkha in our lives.
and that we're creating hopefully more favorable environment for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So
then you
Nellie,
went and
what
looked in the,
next?
you went and looked at this thesaurus. So maybe just throw out some
Oh
other
yeah.
words for this in case they feel more in sync with how you think about it, experience it.
Yeah, because I think we've heard this in Buddhist teachings over years, if you've been studying Buddhism, is that something will bear fruit, that it will develop to the positive nature, that will see an outcome, that will be as a result of all of these things we've gone through. And that was another common English definition for flourishing.
Yeah, and things will thrive, prosper, bloom, blossom, bear fruit, mushroom.
Mushroom.
We were playing around this morning. We talked before we teach together. We were playing around with that word mushroom. And in my backyard, not this one, but my previous house, it was a shady and dark and a lot of rain. And oh my God, mushrooms would pop up everywhere, right in the garden and everything. And, favorable conditions.
Right, right. And in SoCal, not a mushroom to be found, but lots of cactus. So,
I mean, we could play with mushrooms some more too, which is sort of interesting. Some of them are poisonous and will kill you,
right,
and others, people go out and search for, and they're delicacies, and they find them in the forest. So, it's sort of like our life. We're looking at what mushrooms.
what mushrooms, and then I'll go with the cactus blooms. Some of the blooms actually have thorns that if you point towards them, they'll jump out and stick you. So, I mean, you just don't know what you're going to get with some of this.
But
Uh,
you know what you're going to get a mixture.
yeah, yeah,
That's what you
that's
know. That no
right,
anything will be,
right.
positive, wonderful all the time, and no anything. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's all the mixed bag, as
yeah,
they'd say.
yeah.
So
So we
you've
call,
been studying this fellow here.
well, this guy comes up. I haven't met him, Seth Segal. I don't know how to pronounce his Buddhist name. He's a Zen Buddhist, and he's been doing a lot of writing in the secular Buddhist field. And he has a definition or asks the question, what then is flourishing? And we thought we would read a few of the lines and riff off of them. Um, Flourishing lives are lives that are meaningful, emotionally fulfilling. How about I read it first, Nellie, and then emotionally fulfilling, psychologically rich, and sensitive to ethical issues and aesthetic potentials present within each moment.
So there's a lot there, and I'd like all of it. I'd like a life that had all of that in it. The meaningful, the first line, lives that are meaningful, really hit the spot for you. Do you want to say more?
It did in the sense of feeling like an individual life, how much meaning your own meaning matters within the world that you live in can often get obscured or downplayed or um, being too much self if you really feel like your life has meaning. And part of the direction of meaningful is, what is important to us matters. And when you stay with that and start with that, I would say, things develop differently than when you think your life doesn't have any meaning. That's more in line with, I would think, a depressive view of dukkha, that my life is just suffering, there's no meaning. Instead, looking at this direction of where do I find meaning and how do I make meaning out of what happens in my life? That's been important to me.
Um, it's interesting that he divides out emotionally fulfilling and psychologically rich.
Yeah.
I might have put them together, but it's interesting to separate them because there is something different about having emotions that fulfill and having, what would it be, sort of a worldview that's psychologically rich or an inner exploration. I'm not sure. I haven't thought it through.
Right, right, Right. I think there's a distinction in Buddhism often that like our emotions are more of our patterns or sankharas, that we're kind of burdened with them in a certain way. Um, and psychologically rich, I mean, we sometimes have said about our approach, it's psychologically sophisticated, that there's a level of development that we want to develop psychologically, understanding things from a psychological angle.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
if I got to something there, but that was just what came to mind.
Yeah. And sensitive to ethical issues always. This path is an ethical path. That's matters, top of the list,
Yeah,
I mean, kindness, caring, those are really ethical issues, and that's really what we're cultivating.
right, right. And yeah, we just don't want that left out. When it gets left out, other things happen. So we'd like that to be spoken to, and I like that he speaks to that. Um, the last one, the aesthetic potentials, is difficult for me to pronounce and really understand, but you loved it, Nellie. So why don't you go ahead and riff
And
on
this speaks to, that's actually a really interesting point, Linda, which speaks to really, the diversity of how we take up these teachings, how we take up these words. This one worked for me beautifully. It didn't work for you much at all. That's the way it is, huh?
that. Mhm.
I just feel like, and I don't know how much is practice. And, I've done meditation practice, but I've done a lot of other things in my life, including getting older. So who knows what develops out of what soil, so to speak. But I think it's really important. Who said it? Anyway, stop and smell the roses.
Mhm.
I mean, that's what this is
Mhm.
saying to me, that, there's something beautiful to be found if we can just turn around and look. And even, of course, in the middle of hard stuff, there's, the flowers popping up from the cracks in the concrete, etc.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I like the way you say it, but not the way he did. So it's the other thing is like how we hear these teachings, and we really like to have more voices come in. And in fact, we often ask people like, "What's your definition?" After we talk about the definitions of a word, and how does it land with you and within your practice?
Okay, we have to meditate and do that thing called our meditation practice. What do you say?
Let's